released notes from Peter Strzok, and the FBI confirmed the Obama administration's plot to take down the Trump admin and General Flynn. We'll talk about it today on the broadcast. I want to spend more time going through the ramifications of just this half-page of notes released by Peter Strzok that confirm what we now know, the January 5th meeting at the White House with Peter Strzok, and you've got Jim Comey. You've also got Susan Rice, the President of the United States at the time, President Obama, the Vice President of the United States at the time, Vice President Biden, all in this meeting. And you've got the Vice President, who's now the Democrat Party's candidate for President of the United States, Joe Biden. He's the first one in the notes mentioned, and it's talking about using the Logan Act. Now, to remind you, remember, this was an investigation they were ready to close. And it actually looks like that from Jim Comey, who's testified plenty. So I would like to go back to him and say, when you said that the Flynn calls, yes, he was Flynn and Kislyak were talking on calls, but they appear legit. So are you saying that what Mike Flynn was doing the whole time was just normal, kind of what you do as a transition coming in? You would likely, if you were going to be the incoming national security advisor, potentially reach out to one of the superpowers ambassadors? So one of Russia's ambassadors? It's not like, you know, we made out Russia during the Mueller report to be like almost like we have like no diplomatic relationship with Russia, or like they're like Iran and they don't have like an embassy operating. They have a fully functioning. I go to Than Bennett, Washington D.C. I mean, Than, this ambassador Kislyak, he was well known in Washington D.C. The embassy from Russia is I think the second largest embassy in D.C. Behind the UK, maybe. I mean, so you got the UK, you have Russia's embassy, you have Chinese embassy. These are countries that are operating not just at the United Nations with their mission, but they literally have their ambassadors here. And as we see from Jim Comey in a meeting with the President of the United States and Vice President of the United States, President Obama, Vice President Biden, and he's saying that these calls look absolutely legit.
Jordan, if you're the incoming national security advisor and you're not having conversations with those officials, you are not doing your job, plain and simple. And a couple of just very top-line takeaways from these notes that we're going to get into. If you're Director Comey, and if these conversations are legit, then Jordan, why a couple of weeks later do you just send a couple of guys over to try to trap General Flynn if there's a legitimate conversation going on here? And look, I think I can answer my own question there, because while Director Comey has dirty hands on this all over, it's because the President of the United States, the outgoing president, and the vice president directed it, Jordan. I mean, that's what these notes say. It really does. You get the right people on it. Who are the right people? The right people at this point was Director Comey and Peter Strzok.
Folks, the ACLJ is doing work all across the country on all the issues that you care about, all across the world on the issues you care about. And we're able to broadcast it to you because of your support. We're able to do the work in our country because of your support. We're able to do the work internationally because of your financial support. And this is a great time to make a financial contribution to the ACLJ because it's a matching challenge month. What does that mean? We have a group of donors ready to match every donation that comes into the ACLJ right now at aclj.org. You're literally doubling the impact of your donation. Your $25 donation, that's what you're charged on your credit card. That's like $50 for us to ACLJ. No amount too small, no amount too big. It all makes a huge impact. Go to aclj.org, be part of our matching challenge, and donate today.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
If any group feels like they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this. They're fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. But I actually think we're winning this. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson.
We're flying and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join us online at the American Center for Law and Justice at aclj.org.
Now, after this briefing, we know that President Obama asked Sally Yates and Jim Comey to, quote, stay behind, said he had, quote, learned of the information about Flynn and his conversation with the Russia's ambassador about sanctions. Obama specified he did not want any additional information on the matter. He was seeking info on whether the White House should be treating Flynn any differently given the information. We know that now. Literally, we have that in the notes from Peter Strzok. And we also know that that same day that this meeting occurred in the Oval Office with Peter Strzok and the Vice President, the President of the United States, and Sally Yates and Susan Rice and Jim Comey, that the same day Obama's chief of staff, Dennis McDonough, puts in an unmasking request of Mike Flynn. Then we know that 7 days later, the last unmasking request that we've been reported on yet, this is the last one we've been reported on, comes from Vice President Biden. And it's not his chief of staff that's named. That's an interesting point, too. I mean, just to remind people, January 12th, this is just a few days before they're leaving the White House. They're leaving, they're no longer going to be there to direct this operation anymore. And I think that's why you get a gap, too, between this time period in January, and it takes until May until they get a special counsel appointed. So there's a gap because you basically had Jim Comey and Peter Strzok tried to do this on their own without taking their orders from the vice president who suggested how to keep it alive with the Logan Act. But I think it's important to point out that that unmasking request that Joe Biden hasn't gotten pressed on enough, and I think these notes might lead to that, it has him directly listed. It doesn't list like his chief of staff or one of his deputies even. It literally lists Vice President Biden. It's the last unmasking request we know about from the Obama administration.
Well, a couple of different things on that point, Jordan. First of all, I think maybe President Obama was a little bit shrewder than Vice President Biden, so at least to send someone else to do his unmasking. It is pretty telling that the Vice President did it specifically, but I would tell you, I think it's weird on both levels. Like if you go all the way down to the UN ambassador, why is someone that uninvolved making an unmasking request? And then you go all the way up to the Vice President. Why is someone that elite making an unmasking request? Jordan, these unmasking requests are supposed to come from career officials who are directly involved in the intelligence so that the decision makers, the policy makers, the president and the vice president don't actually see that. Then they get it aggregated and briefed to them. So I think it's very strange that the unmasking happened on both levels. And I do think it's also important to point out, Jordan, all of this documentation that we have, from the unmasking to the January 4th field office memo to the memo of the January 5th meeting that Susan Rice wrote later, Jordan, that's all because groups like the ACLJ have gotten involved and demanded this information be available to the public. It's come from different sources. We've had to piece it together. But Jordan, can you imagine if we didn't have all this information and did not know the extent to which the outgoing Obama administration was trying to undermine the incoming administration? It's very critical that we can now piece all of this together.
I mean, this is, again, Joe Biden has been asked about how much he knew about this. And bizarrely, he tries to play it down and then kind of couches it in this interview that is now getting played again with George Stephanopoulos. But I just want to point out that the first person we also know about in the notes, so the first and the last is Joe Biden. Okay, the last unmasking request of Mike Flynn that we know about is literally listing Vice President Joe Biden. The first person on these Strzok notes that they believe that this was, what was important and what could be unclassified is the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, suggesting how to keep an investigation open of Mike Flynn. How about we use the Logan Act? Now, literally, it's a law that has existed but never been used against anyone. In fact, it wasn't used against Mike Flynn. It wasn't actually, remember, Mike Flynn, they came back and said, you didn't tell us all about your phone calls. They didn't say you violated the Logan Act. It's because no one believes the Logan Act is actually constitutional. It was written at a time period where you could say it would actually make sense that a U.S. A person should not hold themselves out to be someone who represents the government, so they shouldn't conduct foreign policy outside of the structure of the U.S. It was written at the beginning of our country when someone would have to get on a boat to go overseas. It could take them months or a year to deliver their message, foreign policy decisions. And so you wanted to make sure the people delivering that message were actually from the United States and from the U.S. government. But when you look at that law now, you realize that can't even be enforced, and it's likely unconstitutional. It violates the First Amendment to the Constitution, the freedom of speech, the ability to talk to people from overseas. Now, we've had a lot of globalization, we've had a lot of changes in our technology, but again, the fact that you could have anyone you want, via video on your personal phone that's in your pocket, that was Jetsons like 20 years ago. So imagine, 1799 writing that into law. I mean, so again, it was made sense at the time. This is where Joe Biden gets into hot water, is when he's pressed with direct questions from people like George Stephanopoulos on these Sunday shows. And listen, if you're running for president of the United States, you're going to get asked questions direct, and you start answering direct. And Joe Biden was there in the room, but take a listen to how he first denies having anything to do with Mike Flynn.
What did you know about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, and was there anything improper done?
I know nothing about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn.
I do want to press that. You say you didn't know anything about it, but you were reported to be at a January 5th, 2017 meeting where you and the president were briefed on the FBI's plan to question Michael Flynn.
I thought you asked me whether or not I had anything to do with him being prosecuted.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, but that's all I know about it.
That's all I know about it? I mean, Sam, we know now that's a lie. And again, I mean, we know it's a lie because the vice president's suggesting what laws to use to go after Mike Flynn.
It's a lie, and one that isn't even believable. Jordan, that interview is from 6 weeks ago. That's not like it's an interview that was happening when he had a whole lot going on. That's well after this became a headline story. He certainly would have taken careful recollection of what he was involved with. And Jordan, not only in front of the President of the United States, Barack Obama, did he recommend a looking into the Logan Act, a violation, but he also personally issued one of these unmasking requests. So it's not just like he had some glancing involvement either, and now he's trying to act like it was insignificant. Jordan, he was one of the main players here, and this lie that says he was not involved in it was made at a time where Jordan, he has taken a look and he has full recollection of what he was involved in, and yet he still tried to pass it off as if he wasn't involved.
Again, as we're walking through these timelines, the day before this meeting that we now have notes from, Peter Strzok's handwritten notes implicating the President of the United States, President Obama, implicating Joe Biden, Vice President of the United States at the time. He's got Sally Yates there. He's got Susan Rice in the room, and he's got Jim Comey as well. And you realize that the day before this, the FBI was ready to close. They were ready to close the investigation into Mike Flynn. So the FBI drafted a document. It had gotten to Peter Strzok's desk on January 4th, 2017. That was Crossfire Razor. Okay, this is before Crossfire Hurricane. So before it expands to President Trump and tried to build this narrative that it was the Trump campaigns were the Russian agents, not just Mike Flynn. But we know that they were ready to close it. That basically before we get to a special counsel, when you actually have, if you think that the investigation was legitimate or not to begin with, and I think with Peter Strzok leading the charge, you could question that. But his own agents were ready to close it out and were suggesting to their boss, Peter Strzok, that it be closed. So we would have never had a special counsel. We wouldn't have drugged the country through impeachment. We wouldn't have had these issues. We wouldn't have been so divisive. And honestly, the impeachment, which had nothing to do with the special counsel. I mean, even that. Think about that for a moment. Remind yourself. The special counsel closes, then they're impeaching President Trump over a phone call with Ukraine with 35 people listening in. And you just don't like the policy decisions. You don't like the way he conducts business as President of the United States. And so your impeachment doesn't go anywhere. But so they're ready. A review of logical databases not yield info on which to predicate further investigative efforts. We don't have anything else to investigate here. We've looked at everything. There's nothing wrong here. Now, at the time, they already knew about the phone calls. They knew about the content of the phone calls. Jim Comey, the day after this report, is saying the phone calls were legit. So they knew what they were dealing with. But Peter Strzok, that same day, before they're going to go meet with the president and vice president, before they're going to meet with Obama and Biden, he says, don't close Razor. The seventh floor is involved. Now, the reference, of course, you all know, is the seventh floor now means the top echelons of the FBI. But Peter Strzok is part of that top echelon. I want to remind you that He was with the Andrew McCabe's and the Jim Comeys throughout this.
Folks, the ACLJ is doing work all across the country on all the issues that you care about, all across the world on the issues you care about. And we're able to broadcast it to you because of your support. We're able to do the work in our country because of your support. We're able to do the work internationally because of your financial support. No amount too small, no amount too big. It all makes a huge impact. Go to aclj.org and donate today.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS, now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
The IRS did the right thing by resolving the case with an injunction that mandated a complete change of the IRS nonprofit tax-exempt work as it relates to issue advocacy organization.
If any group feels like they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
Those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
But I actually think we're winning. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
They're rushing us to the airport, and there was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, now we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, they were getting all this out.
All of the people who prayed for us through ACLJ and through your contacts, I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
I want you to listen to this. This is Senator Marco Rubio. He was talking directly about what we just played for you before we went to break. That's Joe Biden on with George Stephanopoulos. He's denying knowing anything about with Mike Flynn. And then he's saying, well, I knew about the investigation, but I wasn't directing any part of the investigation. Then we know now from Peter Strzok's own notes that it was Joe Biden was suggesting how to keep investigation alive. It's the only interpretation I have from him bringing up the Logan Act, that it was Vice President Biden. I mean, this has kind of sat with me for these last 24 hours since we saw this come out. And when I keep looking down and seeing VP, in this handwriting, Logan Act, and then he tries to bring it back again when he's quoted again by Peter Strzok in his handwritten notes by Peter Strzok. I've been on the Intel committee for 10 years. I've never seen, and then you have President Obama cutting him off there. But he's kind of come up with a way to keep this alive. And in fact, it does keep it alive. So I just want to play for you what Senator Rubio, okay? So Senator Rubio of Florida had to say about Joe Biden's, now that we, looking back with these notes and looking back at how the George Stephanopoulos interview, what Senator Rubio is saying about Joe Biden.
First, he didn't know anything about it. Then he said he was aware. Now there's documents saying he might have been the one, Joe Biden, to say, let's investigate Michael Flynn. Your final thought.
Well, I think ultimately, if all this proves to be true, then there's really only two things to conclude from it. Either A, he's suffering from severe memory loss, or B, he's not being honest. He's lying. So, we'll find out soon enough when the Judiciary Committee does its investigation in the eyes of right in front of the American people. But either he's got memory loss or he's not telling the truth. Neither one of those is good.
No, neither one of those is good. And I do think, listen, Joe Biden does not seem very competent anytime he's getting pressed on these things. But you saw that actually, when he got asked these direct questions, he immediately came out with an answer. He didn't try to couch the first answer. He tried to couch it the second time and try to reword what he wasn't asked by George Stephanopoulos. He wasn't asked directly about, were you involved in the actual investigation, or were you involved in the actual prosecution? And of course, he wasn't involved in the prosecution technically. What he was involved with was keeping the investigation alive for a few weeks because then they were leaving office. But he didn't act like a confused person there. He actually looked, to me, I think it's more the lying and not just Joe Biden being caught off guard with memory loss, as Rubio says, it's either one or the other, because he was actually so coherent with these two answers. He actually tried to flip George Stephanopoulos' words on George Stephanopoulos and try to dance around it without a lot of prodding.
Jordan, he got caught. I mean, he didn't expect his friend George Stephanopoulos to call him on this, but he got caught and he didn't have an answer for it. And, you know, you say he wasn't technically involved in the prosecution, and that is technically accurate. But, Jordan, the people who were responsible for pursuing the investigation and then turning it over for a decision on prosecution had made their decision. And their decision was to close the case. And it was only because of the intervention of Peter Strzok and Jim Comey and now apparently President Obama and Vice President Biden that prosecutorial decision began again. And, Jordan, I would just tell you this. It's just shocking to me that General Flynn and his attorneys are just now getting this information. How is it possible that you've been through all of this and they're just now getting the information? And I think the line that you read from General Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, really says it maybe the most succinctly when she said that Director Comey himself and the highest levels of the Obama administration, that means the president and the vice president, had the transcripts of Flynn's call with officials of other countries and knew General Flynn's calls were lawful and proper, and yet, Jordan, they made the decision to continue prosecution. He might not have been involved in the prosecution, but they made this decision to start it up again.
You go back to the interview. Joe Biden literally says, I know nothing about the moves to investigate Mike Flynn. In the first part of the interview, he doesn't say prosecute. He says investigate. Then he turns it around when George Stephanopoulos said, well, we now know that you were in a meeting on January 5th. By the way, Joe Biden just confirmed that for us in that interview. Also, he confirmed Peter Strzok's notes. He confirmed all this, puts it all together about how involved the President of the United States. Imagine if President Trump, okay, they wanted to have an impeachment over phone calls because they thought he was suggesting that to get any of the aid from the United States, opened up that you had to investigate Joe Biden, who at the time was not an actual government official and who's was not his family members were not government officials, but we went through impeachment over that. Okay, took the country through that and right into basically like a pandemic. So when you go back and actually look at what Joe Biden's trying to deny, I think he's extremely competent on this, which makes me think he actually cared about this one. He was actually involved. We know. In his first denial thing, he literally uses the word investigate. He didn't just say I didn't know anything about Flynn or that, because that would have been right. So he tried to couch it. I guess he tried to couch it there. He didn't couch it effectively. Had to go back and say, oh, I thought you were talking about actually the prosecution. But that's not even what Joe Biden said. He said investigate. And then, you bring up too that you've got a Susan Rice letter a couple weeks after this, the final day of office for the Obama administration, the day that President Trump is being sworn in, and she's writing an email saying everything's done by the book, by the book.
Yeah, first of all, on the vice president, I mean, yes, you did know they were investigating because you were throwing out ideas on where that investigation could pursue to. So, there's just no articulation of that conversation where he didn't know it was investigating could be accurate. And you're right, Jordan, on the Susan Rice memo. I mean, remember, this was not a memo that Susan Rice made immediately after leaving the Oval Office. That's essentially what we have from Peter Strzok, his notes from that day or from that moment. Jordan, a couple of weeks later, on the last day in power for Susan Rice, she found this meeting on January 5th that we've been talking about significant enough that one of her last tasks while being in power was to memorialize that meeting and try to cover the tracks. And I just got to tie it to the news today that she's on the short list for Vice President Biden to be his running mate. I mean, Jordan, if you're Vice President Biden and you're worried about this meeting, what would be one of the best ways to try to inoculate yourself against that? It would be to put one of the other people who was in that meeting and memorialized it in a way that you were comfortable with on the ticket as your running mate. Pretty telling, I think.
So let's go to Larry in South Carolina on line one. Larry, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoy your show. Thank you for taking my call. My question is with the actions of Judge Sullivan Do these warrant possible investigation into his potential removal from the bench?
I don't think so, because, and I'll say this why. It has been kind of unprecedented throughout. So remember, he was first brought these charges by the Department of Justice, and Mike Flynn pled guilty to them, and that's basically, he was just handling the kind of what happens next. And then it gets turned around, and it became an issue where the Department of Justice said, we were wrong to even bring these charges. We didn't have a legitimate reason to even be investigating this. So the whole premise of bringing these charges was tainted, wrong, and we would have dropped this. And then I think Judge Sullivan took some very bizarre steps. Obviously outside the norm, not even just bizarre, things you've never seen before. Judges appointing amicus to argue against and to basically re-prosecute Mike Flynn and things like that. I mean, so it was definitely bizarre actions by the judge. But I think the truth is, Stan, where we should look and where Washington, D.C. is not at the judiciary with Judge Sullivan so much as, and you can say that what he did was absurd. You could say it was ridiculous, outside the norms. The Court of Appeals smacked him down for it. But it's looking at the FBI and Department of Justice under the Obama administration and under the leadership of people like Jim Comey and under the leadership of the previous administration that got to the point of even trying to bring these charges against Mike Flynn. Those are the people that should be investigated, the investigators.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'd say to Larry on Judge Sullivan, let's see if he follows this order all the way completely. If he doesn't at that point, then you might have an issue. But Jordan, you're exactly correct. The reason that the prosecutorial powers exist in the Article 2 branch, the executive branch, is because the people can elect the leadership of that branch. And then the people that are appointed inside the executive branch have more accountability to the people than do the Article 3 judges who, yes, they're nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, but they're a layer removed and they have lifetime appointments. That's why that power resides in the Article 2 branch. But Jordan, when there's abuses inside that Article 2 branch, as there obviously were here, there have to be consequences. So I would look at Vice President Biden's role in this and see if you think that he should be, re-put in charge of this. And then you have to hold people like Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok, who clearly abused their power. Jordan, you've got to hold them accountable.
Folks, the ACLJ is doing work all across the country on all the issues that you care about, all across the world on the issues you care about. And we're able to broadcast it to you because of your support. We're able to do the work in our country because of your support. We're able to do the work internationally because of your financial support. And this is a great time to make a financial contribution to the ACLJ because it's a matching challenge month. What does that mean? We have a group of donors ready to match every donation that comes into the ACLJ. Right now at aclj.org. You're literally doubling the impact of your donation. Your $25 donation, that's what you're charged on your credit card, but that's like $50 for us to ACLJ. No amount too small, no amount too big. It all makes a huge impact. Go to aclj.org, be part of our matching challenge, and donate today.